In today's video, I'll be discussing the French Resistance's background and an account about 3 men who helped the Resistance with their medical needs. In 1940, France collapsed under the German advance. For many French people, found it hard to accept that they had become occupied. Wikipedia says, quote, "Many partisans remember the shock at seeing swastika flags hanging over the Hotel de Ville on top of the Eiffel Tower, at the Paris Boulogne, where the National Assembly building was, converted into the office for the Commandant von Gross Paris. A huge banner was spread across the facade of the building, reading in capital letters, Deutschland sing an allen Fronten." I butchered that. "Germany is victorious in all fronts." A sign that is mentioned by virtually all accounts by partisans at the time. The country was divided, occupied in the north and controlled by Vichy regime in the south. But the war didn't end for everyone. From London, Charles de Gaulle called on French forces to continue the fight. Resistance cells popped up. The resistance groups, quote, were small groups of armed men and women, called the Maquis in rural areas, who conducted guerrilla warfare and published underground newspapers. They also provided first-hand intelligence information and escape networks that helped Allied soldiers and airmen trapped behind Axis line, Wikipedia says. The people who joined the French resistance could have been anyone, quote, including, I don't know how to say that, academics, students, aristocrats, conservative Roman Catholics, including clergy, Protestants, Jews, Muslims, liberals, anarchists, communists, and some fascists, Wikipedia states. The resistance started appearing in 1940 based on Jean Cassou's writing on, quote, refusing to accept that the Reich would win, even if it didn't. It was better to resist. On July 19, 1940, the Special Operations Executive was established in Britain, with orders from Churchill, helping support the resistance. In May of 1941, Freinet founded Combat, one of the first resistance groups. His recruiting strategy was, quote, asking people such questions as whether they believed in Britain would not be defeated, and if they thought German victory was worth stopping. And based on the answers he would ask, men are already gathering in the shadows. Will you join them? In the summer of 1941, Britain adopted the letter V to mean victory, and it spread across the Channel, appearing in France everywhere, becoming one of the main symbols of the resistance. Another cultural resistance item was it becoming common for crowds to sing La Merci on traditional holidays like May Day, Bastille Day. Also in 1941, the resistance began to grow more organized and active. Jean Moulin parachuted into France under orders of Charles de Gaulle to unify the resistance. Their efforts took many forms. Groups like the FTP-MOI carried out attacks, while others destroyed and sabotaged. The resistance members at this point in time were labeled as terrorists to the Germans and were tortured and/or sent to concentration camps if caught. In January of 1943, Jean Moulin unified major southern resistance groups into the MUR, United Resistance Movement, with its armed wing, the Secret Army, AS. They recognized Charles de Gaulle as the leader of the resistance. The milice was formed on January 30th, 1943, by the Vichy France government to combat the resistance. Led by Joseph Donard, it was a pro-Nazi force fighting Jews, communists, and Gaullists. The Service des Travaux Obscurs, I butchered that, or the STO, February of 1943, forced young Frenchmen to work in Germany. Many refused and fled to rural areas, forming guerrilla groups called the Maquis. These fighters were mostly young, poorly equipped, and lived in harsh conditions. But in mid-1943, guerrilla warfare expanded, shifting the resistance from urban sabotage into rural insurgency. Nazi official Fritz Suckel pushed harsh policies to meet labor quotas, including raids and forced arrests. These policies backfired, driving more men into the resistance. Established resistance groups began organizing, training, and supplying the Maquis. Rules and survival methods. They relied on secrecy, mobility, and local terrain for protection. In May of 1943, Moulin created the National Council of Resistance, CNR, to unify efforts. Resistance forces grew rapidly, over 240,000 by late 1943, though many were unarmed. They focused on preparation for D-Day, intelligence gathering, and limited sabotage. By early 1944, the BCRA, Free French Intelligence, was providing daily intelligence reports to the Allies. Key networks like Colonel Remy's Confrères de Notre Dame supplied critical information on German defenses, including the Atlantic Wall. By early 1944, France was in a violent internal conflict between the Maquis, the French fighters, and the Milices, the Vichy fighters. Both sides carried out assassinations, reprisals, and torture. The Milices became increasingly brutal as Allied victory seemed likely. Resistance groups unify as the FFI, Forces Francis de Lemur, I don't know how to say that, under de Gaulle. This was meant to give them a legal status as soldiers, though Germany still treated them as illegal fighters. As D-Day approached, resistance activity intensified. Major sabotage of railroads, communications, and structures occurred. Rail sabotage was also super effective to the point where air attacks were unsuperior. SHAEF planned to use resistance to delay German reinforcements. Massive increase in weapons drops in spring of 1944. Introduction of the Jedburgh teams, Allied special forces, to train Maquis and coordinate operations. A little bit more on them later with the medical stuff. After June 6, 1944, the resistance launched nationwide guerrilla operations, such as ambushes, sabotage, and delays of German divisions. For example, the 2nd SS Division Das Reich took over 18 days instead of 3 days to reach Normandy due to resistance attacks. The German SS responded with massacres of 2 civilians that were suspected of working with the resistance. Resistance forces took areas that the Allies liberated, and after the resistance, many members joined the French army. It wasn't just doctors doing their jobs. It was secret treatment of wounded resistance fighters, hidden clinics and improvised surgeries, and patients who couldn't go to hospitals without being arrested. From the article I found talking about this section of the French resistance, it talked about 3 medical personnel who jumped into France to help the resistance. They were Geoffrey Parker, British surgeon, SOE agent, Myers Wassoon, Free French doctor plus SAS paratrooper, and José Abduclair, resistance leader and political envoy. The article shines some detail on how the Maquis lived and the shock these men faced when joining them on their mission. Quote, "No amount of training, however, can fully prepare the paratroopers for the shock of arriving in the resistance, which is far removed the idealized image they had formed of it. Adapting to the conditions of clandestine life is harsh. As with the resistance fighters, their commitment represents the first and foremost an act of self-inflicted violence." They had their own motivations as well. For Parker, it was professional duty as a medical advisor to Maquis. For Sassoon, it was anti-Nazi and Jewish identity. Finally, for Adulker, it was direct persecution under the Vichy government. Outside our trio, the resistance lacked proper hospitals, were constantly on the move to avoid capture, had severe shortages in supplies, and finally had improvised surgeries in rural hideouts. Though, the overall main goal was, quote, "The task is immense, to help organize the medical resistance to ensure the care of the resistance fighters both immediately and during the liberation, to provide for the health needs of the French population suffering from war and requisitions, by determining both its general needs and specific needs in the event of its insurrection." The British helped as well. The British SOE, Special Operations Executive, trained resistance fighters, coordinated parachute drops, sent agents including doctors like Parker, but limited aircraft early in the war, and supplies were inconsistent. This objective illustrates the scale and complexity of the medical resistance efforts in occupied France. The role of the resistance medical personnel extended far beyond immediate battlefield care. They were tasked with organizing a clandestine healthcare network capable of sustaining resistance fighters over time, while simultaneously preparing for anticipated surge in casualties during the liberation. As a result, medical resistance functioned not only as an emergency response team, but also as a preparatory framework for national recovery. It bridged the gap between immediate and wartime necessity and the broader public health challenges that would accompany the end of occupation. Overall, it's super hard to find anything talking about medical capacity of the medical resistance records weren't taken, as well as how spontaneous the resistance was. I hope you enjoyed today's video. It was really hard to find sources for the medical information from the French resistance. If you guys find any, comment them below. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to see more, click the videos on the left and the right. If you have any video suggestions or any questions, comment them below. Have a great day. I also apologize for my lack of reading skill in this video.